AFR.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
It's been proven again and again and again.
Byrd Harper.
The verification of the dates, the verification of the genealogies, it puts spiritual iron in my spiritual blood to know that we can depend upon the Word of God.
Exploring the Word. Weekday afternoons at 3 Central on American Family Radio. This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. The House expected to take a test vote on the government funding bill this morning. It could then head to the House floor for a vote and then be sent to President Trump. That would end the current partial government shutdown. But it wouldn't end the fight over DHS funding, which has to be figured out in the next 10 days. And Democrats are digging in their heels over ICE. Congressman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts.
And I refuse to fund such a lawless, out-of-control agency. I will not vote for business as usual while mass agents break into people's homes without a judicial warrant in violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Texas Congressman Chip Roy says Republicans are ready to have that fight.
I'm going to be fighting to ensure that we've got the resources necessary for the men and women of Border Patrol, ICE, and the other people at Homeland Security to secure this nation against violent criminals that are endangering the people of the United States.
A woman who detransitioned after identifying as a male, winning a landmark medical malpractice lawsuit. Fox Varian was awarded $2 million after suing the doctors accused of pushing a double mastectomy when she was a minor. Jamie Reed was one of the first children's transgender whistleblowers in the United States.
I am so grateful that this jury decided on this plaintiff's behalf. She deserves justice for this, and she really is the tip of the iceberg on how this industry has been treating these young people and their families. A lot of this becomes that this is no longer a medical standard. Right now, this is a belief system that has been spread through the medical system. These providers have a false belief that they were saving children from the potential of suicide by doing these things. There's no evidence to back that up. And now we are starting to see this belief system basically crumble.
President Trump is set to welcome Colombian President Gustavo Petro to the White House today, where the two leaders are expected to talk about strategies to end drug trafficking and boost trade relations.
Somehow after the Venezuelan raid, he became very nice. He changed his attitude very much. So, I look forward to seeing him. He's coming in. We're going to be talking about drugs because tremendous amounts of drugs come out of his country. And I look forward to seeing. We're going to have a good meeting.
2 more individuals involved in that attack on a Minnesota church last month have been arrested. Former CNN host Don Lemon was indicted and arrested over the weekend for his role in storming the city's church in St. Paul, Minnesota. He says he was being a journalist. Steve Jordahl has more.
A grand jury indicted Don Lemon for conspiring against the rights of religious freedom at a place of worship and for conspiracy to interfere with the exercise of religious freedom. On the one hand, he was live streaming from the protest and was asking questions. On the other hand, the questions often defended the protesters by making up First Amendment claims out of thin air.
There's a constitution in the First Amendment to freedom of speech and freedom to assemble and protest.
But not in a church. New York Post reporter Lydia Moynihan had to correct CNN's Abby Phillips on the air as to what the indictment says Lemon was up to.
You accuse me of mischaracterizing the indictment. This is actually a quote from the indictment that Lemon posted himself at the main door of the church where he confronted some congregants and physically obstructed them as they tried to exit, challenging them with facts about U.S. immigration policy.
Tim Graham of Media Research Center says the mainstream media has already laid down its narrative.
It depends, as usual, on is the journalist accomplishing something for the left? In that case, it's journalism. If the journalist is with a right-wing mob, then he's not a journalist.
Graham notes Lemon was given a standing ovation at Sunday night's Grammy Awards dinner and long ago stopped being a real journalist.
Don Lemon isn't doing this for CNN. Don Lemon's purely doing this for Don Lemon. He's going to make money off that live stream. He's going to make money off his Substack.
I'm Steve Jordahl.
Global shares have surged, led by a nearly 70% jump in South Korea's benchmark to a record close. Shares in Tokyo gained nearly 4%, also setting a record. U.S. futures also rose, while oil prices fell. More news online at afn.net and download the AFN mobile app for your Apple or Android device. I'm Rusty Pugh.
AFA Action takes attacks on the family seriously. The enemies of the family constantly employ new tactics to try to sneak past our radar. They know if we stand together, their evil plans will fail. Your gift to AFA Action allows us to stay vigilant against their onslaught. And if you give this month, you'll receive access to the Cultural Institute video When Your Faith is Illegal by Frank Harbor on AFA Stream as our thanks. You can make your gift today at afaaction.net.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview. The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, February 3rd, and we are rapidly approaching the thrust of the election cycle for 2026, and along with some very important elected offices, including a few governors around the state. My home state of Florida, of course, all eyes of, I think, the nation are on this state to ensure that we hand off the reins to someone who is a worthy successor of Governor Ron DeSantis, who is term limited. But not just the candidate races are important for 2026. There are also ballot initiatives. You will recall in 2024 how many different abortion-related proposals were on ballots across the country. This is really the new testing ground of the left for a lot of different ways that they're now trying, even more intentionally, I think, than they had in the past, maybe 10 or 20 years. They are trying to push through constitutional amendments in the states because those are much more difficult to change or modify or amend than legislative initiatives and legislative proposals. And so they're trying to do this on a wide variety of fronts. And here in Florida, they also tried in 2024. It was the big two was Amendment 3 and 4. 4 was our abortion amendment. 3 was about recreational marijuana. And if you recall, Governor DeSantis was traversing the state at the time talking about Amendments 3 and 4 and why they were bad for the state. Regardless of whether you live in Florida or elsewhere, you need to pay attention to what is on your ballot and not just rely on the ballot summary when you're in the ballot box making your decision. But this Amendment 3 was pushed by basically what we've called Big Weed, and it was a outside of the United States company that was essentially trying to push this through in Florida. And they are trying to do it again. And so there's a group behind the initiative, Smart and Safe Florida, but they fell short of the required verified signatures by Sunday's February 1st deadline. And so the Florida Department of State put out a press release saying, note to press, 2026 constitutional amendment petition campaigns. All 22 active proposed constitutional amendments by initiative petitions failed to meet the requirements of Florida law for placement on the 2026 general election ballot. So this is great news. It's not just the marijuana amendment, but it's all 22 active proposed constitutional amendments. So Florida doesn't have to worry about this. But joining me now is Byrd, who is our Florida Secretary of State. And I think this is great news for several reasons. First, that we don't have petition fraud gaining traction in Florida. So good morning, and tell us more about this.
Yes, good morning, Jenna. Glad to be with you. And yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. This is a trend we've seen across the country where certain groups don't have control over the legislature. They then use the citizens initiative process to essentially buy democracy. So we've seen foreign billionaires and foreign corporations invest in these actions. And, in Florida, we've taken a strong stand under the governor's leadership. He created the Office of Election Crimes and Security, which gives us the ability to go in and investigate and then refer to law enforcement and make sure that before we change a sacred document like our Constitution, that the law is followed.
Yeah, and this is great and makes sense, and it absolutely is necessary to ensure that there isn't petition fraud. And so there was this deadline Sunday that passed, and not any of the ballot initiative proposals met that threshold. Do you anticipate there may be litigation around this, or is this just the final call and it's over?
Yeah, as we've seen in elections over the last several cycles, when you lose, you litigate, and I would never say never, but we've gathered the necessary facts and evidence, and we followed the law as we expect all of the initiative petition organizations to do, and so we're very confident, and we've been successful in every part of this that's been litigated thus far, and I see no reason why that would change.
Yeah, and that's really encouraging because, as you rightly pointed out, the ballot initiative process is often the way that that big corporations or other special interest groups or whatever, if they're not successful at lobbying the legislature, then they try to get around the legislature through ballot initiative. And, advocates of the initiative process would say, well, this is the way that the citizens can make their voice heard if the legislature is refusing to hear what, the general population wants. My former home state of Colorado, I think, made a really bad decision when we did a similar thing and had a constitutional amendment back in, I think it was 2012, and it was our Amendment 64 that legalized marijuana, and we've seen the effects across the state of how terrible that has been, what that has opened the door to, a variety of other things that have been damaging to the state. But overall, in terms of the ballot initiative process, this is one of those things where I can see the pros and cons of it and why ballot initiatives end up gaining traction. But in a representative republic where we have the legislature that is supposed to be there to make our laws and have our voices heard, we don't have these other elements necessarily of direct democracy, and we've seen some of these abuses. What's your view of overall of citizens initiatives, and what should voters be on the lookout for? Because a lot of times, as I mentioned in the beginning, Byrd, that a lot of times these just small, simple statements on the ballot aren't necessarily indicative of what the measure actually contains. And as Governor DeSantis had argued back in 2024 for Amendments 3 and 4, both of these were actually misleading.
Well, you're exactly right, and the governor was right. And what we've seen is, the idea behind them is a noble one. The citizens can organize and put something on the ballot. But these organized efforts are no longer about citizens going door to door and convincing their neighbors. These are heavily funded to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, where people from outside the state come to the state. And in many instances, we have evidence of people telling voters who signed the petition the exact opposite of what it did. So they're profiling people, looking at them, and they would say, this is actually an amendment, sign this petition because it's against legalizing marijuana. So this is the type of fraud that they're engaging in, and we end up having to play whack-a-mole trying to catch their fraudulent behavior. So I served in the legislature, and we would often hear from members that the people aren't represented by members who are in the legislature on the floor in debate and saying that the people aren't represented. So I think they should be used very judiciously, and I'm happy that in our state we've made it difficult, because it should be difficult to amend the Constitution. And this is what people need to understand, is once something's in the Constitution, it only can be changed by a constitutional amendment, which is why I favor doing something in law, because if the idea is bad or needs to be tweaked, the legislature can come back and do that. It's much, much harder with a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have can recall many instances in Colorado where, you're walking out of the store and somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh, hey, this is just a petition, and you're not for or against, you're not signing, anything, you're not voting. You're just allowing us to get this in front of the voters." And, they often frame it as, "Oh, aren't you for choice?" I mean, it seems like, one of those kind of leftist arguments, but it's not really explaining to voters the actual process and how different a constitutional amendment is than a legislative measure and why we have the legislature. And so this is just indicative as well of why a good, solid civics education among the voting populace is so necessary. But here in Florida, what is our process then? And I know that we have kind of beefed up a lot of the election security measures and those things, but your process to ensure that there isn't this type of petition fraud going on, and that there aren't signatures that are fraudulent, or these groups that are signing up people that maybe they're a visitor to Florida and they come out and they have to ask you, okay, are you registered to vote in Florida? But they're not checking these types of things and ensuring that the petition process is actually lawful.
Sure. So in Florida, we have the Constitution lays out the right to have the petition process, and we have statutes that elaborate on that they have to attain a certain number of signatures based upon the turnout from the prior general election. They have to meet a certain number of congressional districts, so they have to get the number of signatures in at least half of the congressional districts. And then if they attain that, then the language has to go to the Supreme Court for approval to make sure that it's not confusing or log rolling where you have multiple issues contained in one amendment. And then if they get past that, then it goes to a vote of the people where it has to get a supermajority of at least 60% to get in the Constitution. But as I said, we since 2020 under Governor DeSantis, Florida has passed more election integrity measures than any other state in the country, including the creation of the Office of Election Crimes and Security, which I oversee, which is a unit that is dedicated to gathering evidence of election fraud. And then we have a report. We just filed our third report that's due to the legislature and the governor. It's available for anyone to read, where they can see the documented evidence of election fraud that we've uncovered, and then those referrals to law enforcement for prosecution where necessary.
Wow. And I wish that other states in so many ways would take Florida's lead, but especially over election integrity. I mean, this was one of obviously the biggest issues that had been an issue for a while, but I think was highlighted amid the controversy of the 2020 presidential election. But to ensure that we have secure elections, that there is election integrity, should not be a partisan issue, and every state should want to follow Florida's lead. And so, what criteria do you believe most commonly leads to fraud in ballot initiatives in particular? What do you most often see that your reports would say, okay, these signatures didn't meet the requirements?
Yeah, so the biggest problem is with the gatherers themselves, we call them circulators, the people that are outside your grocery store or what have you, gathering the petitions. That's where we find the most fraud. And so one of the things we did in a bill last session that we implemented this time, and it's still up on appeal at the 11th Circuit, but we banned non-Floridians from gathering petitions, because if this is truly a citizens initiative process, they should should be Floridians doing it, because what they do is they hire circulators from all over the country, and then when they commit fraud, they abscond back to their state, and then we have to try to get jurisdiction over them from a state that may not be amenable to that. But the other thing we've done is banned non-citizens from collecting these things. So we're trying where we can to rein in the circulators, but the evidence we've gathered this time is that it's still a major problem. And so what I would like to see happen, and this is obviously a conversation for the legislature, but somehow get rid of using paid circulators to do this, because it's just not working, and we shouldn't have to expend resources, like I said, playing whack-a-mole with them.
Yeah, and Secretary of State Byrd, one last question for you, because you're right. I mean, this is something, like we said, that should ensure that the process is smooth, that it's fair. to everyone, that it follows the law. And yet, the Florida Democratic Party released a statement arguing that the outcome here effectively shut out voters from quote unquote direct democracy in 2026. And they're arguing that the concern, according to them now, is that the process is too restrictive. My opinion is the process should be restrictive, and it should be easy. Constitution for the reasons we've described. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, the word democracy doesn't appear in our Constitution. So this notion of direct democracy is an anathema to our Republican system. And those who complain about it just either don't understand or want a different process from what the founders gave us. I mean, we are celebrating the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. These principles are important. And I've always said, if a law is important enough to be on the books, it's important enough to be enforced. So if we're agnostic about what's trying to be on the ballot, what I would ask these people that are complaining is the legislature passed HB 1205, which is the law last year giving us additional authority. If I ignore it or don't enforce it, then I'm derelict in my constitutional duty to ensure and safeguard the election process. So very confident in what we've done, proud of the work that we've done, and we will continue to fight to uphold the integrity of the law in Florida.
Amazing. Well, this is why I love living in the free state of Florida, and I appreciate all of the hard work that your office does, Secretary of State Byrd, and all of the executives. It's just fantastic, and it's so in line with what the government is obligated to do, which is to protect the rights of citizens and to ensure that our process is fair, that it runs smooth. And so we do really appreciate the hard work that you do. You can follow Florida Department of State at FL Sec of State on X. You can also follow Byrd at Byrd, BYRD. And I would encourage you, if you are not in the free state of Florida, well, first, sad for you, but no, I know people love their home states usually, but make sure you know your process, make sure that you are holding your officials accountable and know what is on your ballot, especially coming up. We'll be right back with more.
So you're scrolling through your social media newsfeed when you happen to run across a story about a bill that would remove safeguards that protect your kids from adult content online. You think, boy, it's a good thing I saw that. But then you realize the story is a week old and you missed the window to do anything. It's so frustrating, but it doesn't have to be. As an AFA insider, you'll stay up to date on the issues that are designed to destroy our families and our freedoms, and you won't have to spend hours online combing every corner of the internet for the latest developments. There's no more accidentally running across a story or overhearing enough of a story to pique your interest than leaving you wondering about the important details. You'll be the one in the know, and you'll be equipped to take action, helping keep our families and our freedoms safe. It's easy to become an AFA insider, so why not do it today? Visit afa.net/activism. afa.net/activism.
Every February 2nd, a groundhog affectionately named Puxatawny Phil emerges to predict the weather. It's a charming tradition, but Phil's track record is only 40% accurate. Humanity has always craved glimpses into the future, but there's only one reliable forecaster, God himself. All the prophecies in scriptures have been fulfilled with 100% accuracy. Not one has failed. Isaiah 46:9 and 10 boldly declares, I am God, and there is no other, declaring the end from the beginning. Only God knows the future because he exists outside of time. And the Bible prophecies yet to be fulfilled will come to pass just as certainly as those already completed. Want to know what's coming? Skip the groundhog and open God's prophetic word. This is Tim Moore wishing you Godspeed.
We're dedicated to proclaiming to as many people as possible that Jesus is returning soon. Find out more at christinprophecy.org.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Stern. Stand by for news and commentary next. A radical Democrat wants to ban Newsmax programming from taxi cabs across New York City. Brad Seagal is the Manhattan Borough president. He's upset because a 1-minute Newsmax update is broadcast on television screens posted in the backs of taxi cabs. The broadcast, part of a partnership with Curb, a company that provides content for taxis. The borough president hates Newsmax and wants Mayor Zohran Mamdani to breach the contract, accusing us of broadcasting politically charged content, said we were not a credible news source. However, Reuters recently announced Newsmax was one of the top news brands in the country. Newsmax executives say it's nothing more than a pure act of censorship. Curb defended the partnership, noting all content is straight news, no opinion. And here's a thought. If you don't like Newsmax, every TV screen is equipped with a mute button and an off switch. I'm Todd Stearns.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And we mentioned on the program yesterday that there was a detransitioner to take a medical malpractice lawsuit to trial, the first one that won a $2 million judgment. This was out of the New York area, and Fox Varian, who is a young woman, sued her area psychologist and plastic surgeon for the gender transition mastectomy she got at 16. It was a 3-week jury trial, and only one reporter apparently was willing to attend the entire 3-week trial and document what happened. His name is Benjamin Ryan. He's an independent reporter, and he joins me now. So, Benjamin, first of all, this is a landmark case. I mean, this is the first detransitioner to take a medical malpractice lawsuit, I think, to verdict. And obviously, this verdict was huge for her and against the utter, butchering of this type of medical practice that I believe, of course, is harm. And these individuals, psychologists, doctors, whoever is involved, should be held accountable. Tell us more about the trial and what you observed.
Sure thing. Just thanks for having me on. And a couple of things. One, I come to this as trying to be a neutral journalist, so certain words that you might use or opinions, those aren't necessarily mine. Just want to draw that distinction. And also, there was one other reporter who was there part of the time, and a lot of people have said that this is an indictment of the mainstream media, that nobody wanted to cover this. But in fact, it was just a trial that was looking not to be found, and so you had to have been told about it, essentially. But indeed, it's a historic moment. There are about 28 total detransitioner lawsuits that I've been able to tally, and the vast majority of them are structured like this case, in which they're a medical malpractice case. And a lot of people have presumed that, these trials are going to go right after the system. They're going to undermine the foundations of this type of medical treatment. But in fact, what they really say is they ask, what is the standard of care in this field that does exist? And did these practitioners deviate from it? And therefore, if they did that cause the pain and suffering and injury of the plaintiff? And the answer to those questions was yes, in many cases, in the questions that were presented to the jury on Friday.
And that's a really interesting distinction. And obviously, across the political spectrum, people have, very strong opinions on this, including me. And I appreciate your approach as, just a straight reporter wanting to, just look at the facts of this case, because I think that both sides can kind of perhaps, get ahead of themselves as well as far as what this means necessarily for, the rest of the country. But so just this trial in particular, what were the questions that ultimately went to the jury in terms of his standard of care?
So I can get this for you. So here they are. So Kenneth Einhorn was a psychologist, and he'd been treating Fox Varian for about 2.5 years before the surgery. And then Dr. Simon Chin was the plastic surgeon to whom he referred the patient, and Simon Chin saw her twice in a 9-week period before ultimately doing the surgery. So the case really concerned whether Einhorn was thorough in treating with her, and also whether when she brought up that she thought she was transgender and then soon after brought up that she wanted to have a mastectomy, whether he was just sort of blindly affirming, as is often the sort of prevailing ethos in the gender-affirming care field, as it's called, or whether he really did the kind of work that's necessary as a psychologist to not essentially give tacit approval and to really discuss these issues as opposed to putting her on a train. There were lots of discussions about train metaphors in this trial to this ultimate surgery. It was only 11 months between the time that she started to come out as transgender and she actually had this surgery. So the questions had to do with, did he treat her properly? Did he follow the standard of care as a psychologist for this particular issue? And the answer was no, that he did not, and that caused her injury. And then there was a lot of questions about the referral letter. It was pretty shoddy. That had the wrong diagnosis in there. And there was a question about whether he should have written it the day that he did as opposed to waiting. And so he was faulted for that as well. And he and the plastic surgeon were both faulted for not communicating directly with one another. They never talked directly. There was just a letter going one way. And there were a lot of unanswered questions ultimately. And then the plastic surgeon himself was faulted for doing the surgery when he did, as opposed to, say, waiting.
And I can see where the train metaphors would come in, because it seems like she was railroaded. Then that would probably came up a lot. Rather than saying, okay, let's actually go through what might be the underlying cause, and then so with that that handoff that you mentioned, the letter that went to the doctor, what was the accusation, I guess, and then the jury's, ultimate verdict on what the doctor should have done in terms of evaluating whether the psychologist referral was sufficient in order to actually accomplish the procedure?
Well, several things. The letter was very short. There are only 2 paragraphs that really had to do with her condition, and then just one extra paragraph that said basically, call me. And crucially, it included the wrong diagnosis. The diagnosis for this type of intervention is gender dysphoria, which is a psychiatric diagnosis. It's related to distress from a conflict between someone's gender identity and then their birth sex. So instead, Dr. Einhorn, the psychologist, put in body dysmorphia, which is another psychiatric condition, but it involves obsessing and ruminating very painfully over some perceived flaw in your body. And that is actually a contraindication for plastic surgery, because people who have that condition are never going to be satisfied with their bodies, so you can't just keep operating on them. So oddly enough, Dr. Chin saw that and didn't reach out to Dr. Einhorn to say, hey, what's up? It seems to me this letter, the context suggests suggests gender dysphoria, but why did you write body dysmorphia? There were also some incorrect facts in there. Dr. Einhorn claims that she was doing better with her anxiety because, as evidenced by her attendance in school, but she had just dropped out of regular schooling that semester. And then also there was a question of whether she really was psychologically stable with her depression and anorexia. And Dr. Chin, in fact, said that even if those were stable, they needed to have been mentioned in the letter as a past diagnosis, and then they weren't. So it was just essentially too short. Dr. Einhorn never talked about his own qualifications or training in this particular field, which he didn't have any, by the way. And so it was just basically a shame, according to the plaintiff's attorney, that these 2 men, they could have talked to each other, maybe a single phone call, could have said, you know what, maybe this patient isn't ready, and it would have saved her from losing her breast at 16.
Wow. And, was there testimony as well on more of the long-term physical and psychological harm that maybe contradicts, what is commonly put forward in the media to say, these types of surgeries are the solution to body dysmorphia and some of these things. Was there testimony on that issue?
So it was a solution to gender dysphoria, just to clarify. So ultimately, Voxberian, the plaintiff, she detransitioned after 3 years, meaning she decided she was indeed a female and reverted to identifying and presenting that way, regretted her surgery, and ultimately sued. So interestingly, the case didn't really go into the greatest details about the long-term implications, as you're saying. She did say that she had chronic nerve pain and numbness, loss of sensation in her nipples, and then, of course, the scars from the surgery. And interestingly, one of the defense attorneys for Kenneth Einhorn, his name was Neil Kornfeld, in his closing summation, he really criticized the plaintiff's attorney for not bringing in experts to address your question, to say, well, what are the implications of a teenager not having her breasts for the rest of her life, emotionally and physically, et cetera. And so the plaintiff's attorney responded to that. He was furious, and he just said, how would you like if someone came in here and took off your penis? Would we have to explain to you what that means? And he really said, that is offensive. There were 4 of the 6 jurors were women. I don't need to tell you what it means to lose your breasts. So that's how it was left. And I thought that was a very powerful part of the summation.
Wow. And and so with this, how long did the jury deliberate?
It was about 5 hours. And after about hour 4, it's classic scene in a movie. Everyone's pacing in the hallway and going in and out of the room and freaking out. But we got a jury question that I was able to attend and hear, which was regards to the specifications of doling out awards. So by that time, we knew she'd won. So then about an hour later, indeed, she did win. So it was pretty quick, but it had been a 3-week trial, and we were getting up against the end of the day, and you knew that jury really wanted to go home.
Yeah. Often that's how it goes with some of the jury verdicts, and especially if it's on a Friday. But were you able to talk to any of the individual? Well, there you go. Yeah. So were you able to talk to or interview any of the jurors afterward?
Unfortunately not. And they were really impassive the whole time. I really could not get a read on them. They were pretty stoic, except there was this one woman who was kind of holding her chin pensively and just concentrating with everything she had. And I said, that's the forewoman. She is circumspect. She wants to be fair. And indeed she was, but I approached everyone afterwards and said, do you want to talk to the media? They didn't even answer. They just bolted for the door. So unfortunately, no, that's a black box. I don't have any information on how they were thinking.
And that would have been fascinating to see. What were the main points that really convinced them. But you mentioned as well, and I'm speaking with Benjamin Ryan, who's the independent journalist who was covering the story. You can follow him at Ben Ryan Writer on X. He also has a Substack. I'd encourage you to follow because independent journalism is really important, and I appreciate your work on this because but for your reporting, we may not know, that this case even occurred. And so, kind of from that multi-pronged standpoint, obviously this does deal with a minor, but at the same time, the public interest in this case obviously would be huge. And so in terms of the record being almost entirely under seal that you mentioned in your post, you were able to obtain some documents prior to that. Was that, to your knowledge, just because this was a minor, or how unusual is that in this jurisdiction?
I don't have the answer to that specifically, but it is my guess that the judge sealed all the court records, which I have all the records from before the seal, but I don't have any of the official transcripts. So that was frustrating for me because I'm having to type for 3 weeks straight because I don't get an official transcript at the end of the day. So I think the judge was concerned about the plaintiff's privacy. She's 22 years old now, but he just didn't want a spectacle. He was pretty annoyed that I was there and wondered how I'd found out. And he kind of tried to scare me off by saying, there are HIPAA rights that this plaintiff has. And, HIPAA doesn't apply to a journalist. And it was a public setting. So that was just him trying to sort of put me off the trail, if you will. But it's hard to say. I don't know. I'd be interested to know from you, like how common it is to seal a case like this where you are talking about an adult, but it's about things that happened to them when they were a minor.
Right. Yeah. That's really interesting, and maybe that's another question for a good investigative reporter. And in this particular jurisdiction, it may just be that it happened when she was a minor, but as you mentioned, she's now 22, so it doesn't necessarily immediately make sense why it would be almost entirely under seal. But you were able to find out that this trial was occurring, and there really wasn't that much of interest from just an independent journalist perspective. I mean, obviously, you're enterprising your work, you're going out and you're finding out what's going on. For the mainstream media that just almost is just reactive to some of the news, do you find that the difference between, what someone like you does versus maybe some of the critiques of mainstream media are accurate in terms of not going out and finding out that these types of things are going on?
Well, just in this particular case, the only reason I was the only person there is because somebody else decided to tell me. So you could say I was kind of selected by those people to show up because they wanted me there. So I don't think it's an indictment in this particular case that the other journalists weren't there because there was no way they would have known about it. However, in the larger scheme of things, I think that it's indeed a fair indictment of a lot of the media on the left about what they choose not to report on. So I'll say that a lot. I'll get no's when I'm trying to pitch around to left-wing media. So that's why I largely write for more right-wing media or center media because they're open to it. And you can really see in all the kind of requests I've gotten from people such as yourself to talk about this, they've entirely come from right-wing or heterodox podcasts or radio shows. So, there's plenty of opportunity to digest off of what I've written into your own articles, but it's only really happening on the right.
And that's a sad indictment, I think, of our media system in general, and why we can't just rely on what media selectively curates and says this is the news you should be paying attention to, and why I'm thankful for independent journalists, for the rise of the independent podcaster and X and all of these things that can make these stories go more viral and get more attention. But last question for you, Benjamin Ryan, and I have so many more questions, so maybe you'll have to come back on sometime. But this is really fascinating. But in your opinion, just after watching all of the testimony and the witnesses, the experts, and the jury's reaction or non-reaction, what do you think policymakers and perhaps the medical industry most misunderstand about this issue right now, as we're kind of all framing the larger debate? What maybe are people missing that was focused on there in the courtroom?
I think I'd say that a real difference in this case is you hear about these big gender clinics, and they're run by these very well-resourced academic medical centers, and like Boston Children's affiliated with Harvard or whatever it might be. And they have a pretty tight ship, and they run a system where it's all under one roof, and you've got psychologists and endocrinologists and surgeons, and they all know each other. But the system here was really ad hoc. And you don't hear about that as much because it was just one local psychologist who kind of heard some about how this type of treatment goes, and a plastic surgeon does this on occasion. So I think that that's probably more common than we realize. And then, when it comes to the Trump administration using this full of government assault on this field to try to end it in the blue states where it hasn't already been banned in the red states, it's perhaps, it's easier to knock out the Trump administration, these big, huge academic centers, but there's always, these independent little guys who may still be doing this work, don't take Medicaid, so you can't threaten to take it away from them. So that type of treatment may still persist, in smaller, more fractured ways, even if the Trump administration succeeds in these tactics and trying to end this field entirely.
Well, really fascinating. And is your Substack out already, or when does that come out?
Yeah. So I put out several Substacks already about this, including some of the case files that I had. It's benryan.substack.com.
All right. Well, amazing. Well, thank you so much for your reporting, for your
Jenna.
work on this. Yeah, and for coming on and answering, more of these questions. I think more reporters need to be going and paying attention, to some of these jury trials and these legal issues that aren't necessarily always in mainstream media. So again, you can follow Benjamin Ryan at Ben Ryan Writer on X, and then also he has a link to his Substack there. And my opinion on this is we're gonna see more and more of these detransitioners take these types of things to verdict, because this is permanent bodily harm. And just from what Ben was talking about, it seems like neither the psychologist nor the doctor really met a standard of care that is it's ultimately ending in lifelong permanent harm to these detransitioners, and it's utterly tragic. But we'll be right back with more.
If we lose this cultural war, we're going to have a hedonistic, humanistic society.
Discover the story of the culture warrior Don Wildman and how he went head-to-head with Hollywood, Playboy, the homosexual agenda, and the Disney empire. The movement Don started paved the way for Christians to boldly stand for truth and righteousness in a hostile culture. Watch Culture Warrior today for free. Visit culturewarrior.movie.
Jerusalem, oh Jerusalem, how many times I would have taken you under my wings. They had everything that was necessary for them to know Jesus and follow him, and they went their way.
I think for nations, for individuals, there is a day that you have to make the decision to respond to the Lord, and it might be that the door of opportunity after that shuts.
Exploring the Word, weekdays 3 p.m. Central on AFR.
By mercy and truth, iniquity is purged, and by the fear of the Lord, men depart from evil. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. We live in a day when churches are filled with people ready to hear and receive God's mercy. Unfortunately, however, it is often accompanied by a de-emphasis or concealment of the truth of God's word. Paul, the salvation by grace through faith apostle, was asked, if salvation is solely a product of grace, what benefit then does the law provide? Paul responded, without the law, I wouldn't have known God's righteous standard and how far away from it I was. Any presentation of God's mercy absent God's truth is no gospel at all. Iniquity is purged by mercy and truth.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
Maybe this is you too. There's enormous frustration right now with healthcare costs. It is amazing. Healthcare costs for families in the last 20 years have almost tripled, and it just keeps getting worse. All this to say, this is why MediShare is so in demand right now. People are looking for alternatives. And MediShare is proven you can save thousands of dollars a year and actually like it more. Over 1 million Americans are now part of healthcare sharing, and MediShare is the gold standard. It's trusted, it works, it's been helping people save money and have peace of mind now for 30 plus years. It's not some big impersonal thing either. It's a community of people like you helping each other. So yeah, if you're frustrated too, here's your chance to make a refreshing change. You'll notice the difference as soon as you call. They're easy to talk to. You can get a price within 2 minutes. Here is the number. Call 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE. 833-44-BIBLE.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And the census is a really big issue in the legal landscape right now, because you'll recall in the 2020 census that there was not a question that was allowed to be asked on the census of whether you are a citizen or not, which I think is utterly ridiculous, because only U.S. citizens have a right to be counted in terms of apportionment and representation, and how we actually get to the number of U.S. representatives and also the number of votes that each state has in the Electoral College. And so all of this absolutely matters. And of course, it's just the left that is wanting to suggest that, that's a racist question, or, all of their other defenses. But that if counting non-citizens ultimately led to advancing Republicans' interests, then of course the Democrats would be the first ones to say, no, we can't do that. That's unconstitutional. But Attorney General Catherine Hanaway of the great state of Missouri is suing the U.S. Census Bureau for, in her words, unconstitutionally allowing illegal aliens to commandeer the path to the White House and compromise our elections. She says United States citizens have a right to representation, not illegal aliens, and United States citizens should decide electoral votes and congressional seats, not illegal aliens. I could not agree more, and the Attorney General joins us now. So thank you for doing this, and tell us more about this lawsuit.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. It's great to be back with you again, and I will say you've summed it up beautifully. Right now, and ever since Jimmy Carter, the Census Bureau has counted illegal immigrants for the purposes of allotting congressional districts, electoral votes, and federal dollars that flow through the states. So the net effect is lots and lots and lots, millions of illegal immigrants are getting more than their fair share of congressional seats, electoral votes, and federal program dollars. The city of Los Angeles alone has 2 million illegal immigrants. By comparison, Missouri's total population is 6.1 million people. It obviously is costing Missouri tremendously for those 2 million illegal immigrants in Los Angeles to get counted in the census. We think for Missouri alone, it would mean one additional congressional seat and millions in additional federal dollars. And for every congressional seat, you get one electoral vote. So this really would be a shift from the power on the coast.
And I think we might have lost the Attorney General. Are you? Oh, okay. I'm being told by Devin we'll try to get her back. But she mentioned, this really would be a shift back to ensuring that there are simply proper apportionments among the various states. And so this isn't just about, one state and ensuring that within the state there are, free and fair elections and ensuring that there's correct apportionment. It's basically the same thing, honestly, that the Trump campaign was arguing in 2020, that if one state violates the rules, that affects all of the other participating states. And so especially when we talk about the composition of Congress and when we're talking about the composition of the Electoral College, it matters that every state not only plays by the same uniform standard and rules, and there's election integrity implicit in that, but that who participates in that process in terms of the Electoral College and Congress, ultimately that is uniform among the states. And so this is a really great lawsuit, and I'm really grateful to the Attorney General for pursuing it. I have some other questions. Do we know, Devin, are we trying to get her back, or what's... Okay, I'm being told we may have. Okay, yay! I think you are there. All right, so we were just talking. I was just kind of bouncing off of what you just said. So in terms of all states who participate in this process have to play by the same rules, and so where is your lawsuit being filed in terms of holding states like California responsible for counting illegal aliens when they shouldn't be?
So the good news for everybody is that it is a national count, so California doesn't get to set their own rules. We filed our lawsuit in the Eastern District of Missouri, but it would have a national impact. And in fact, because it's a challenge to apportionment, it goes from the Eastern District of Missouri, and the first appeal is directly to the United States Supreme Court. So timing-wise, I think we probably are not going to be able to resolve this until in time for the 2028 elections. But we're trying to push as hard as we can and maybe even have an impact this year.
Yeah, which is absolutely needed. And so President Trump has been talking about doing kind of a midway census. I mean, that constitutionally it's only required, once every 10 years. Would this trigger if successful, would this trigger a new census, or is it just to ensure that the next census is done differently and more accurately?
No, our lawsuit asks for them to recount for the 2020 census and exclude illegal aliens, because President Trump in his first term told the Census Bureau, don't count illegal aliens. And as soon as Biden got in office, he reversed that and counted illegal aliens. So that's part of why we needed to file suit. We know President Trump's going to do the right thing, but we don't know that any president after him will do the right thing.
Yeah, and it's absolutely wild to me that here we are in America's 250th anniversary. We have the Census Clause right there in the U.S. Constitution that, we've done this kind of from the beginning, and this question still hasn't actually been reconciled. And is this just because this issue has only just now come to the fore, or why hasn't this been addressed historically?
Well, part of it is because nobody had the audacity to count illegal immigrants until Jimmy Carter. And then Reagan got us some real immigration reform, and things, calmed down for a while. And I think it all has come to a head because Joe Biden just opened the borders.
Yeah. And this just shows how there can be these kind of twists and manipulations and, in my opinion, legal perversions of the constitutional text and, kind of some of these loopholes to then get to the places where we need to litigate things like this. And, of course, the left and opponents of this would argue that the Census Clause refers to persons, not citizens. How does your lawsuit reconcile that text with your argument?
Yeah, so it says persons living in states, and it really turns on the permanency of your residence in a state. There is also case law interpreting what it means to live in a state on a permanent basis, and it's really clear that it's not a traveler, it's not somebody who's here with a temporary visa, it's not somebody who's here on business, and it's certainly not somebody who's here illegally. It's those people who have the right to permanently live legally in a state. So if you are a green card holder, you would be counted in the census. But that's it. It's citizens and green card holders, not travelers, not visa holders, and certainly not illegal immigrants.
And I'm speaking with Missouri Attorney General Catherine Hanaway. You can follow her at AGC Hanaway on X. I'd encourage you to do that. That's where I find out about all of these wonderful things that she's doing in Missouri, and really appreciate that. And so, I'm old enough, of course, to remember in 2020 when the Supreme Court was very hesitant to take any sort of election integrity challenges that were being presented by the Trump team at that time. Obviously, most famously, the Pennsylvania versus Texas lawsuit, and some of these things that went to what the left has made it more controversial, election integrity and some of these things, than really I think it should be, in terms of just everybody following the rules, everybody knowing what the rules are. Do you think that the Supreme Court would have that kind of same hesitation, or maybe because this isn't in the midst of all of the volatility that was going on in 2020, this is just much more of a clean path I think it's something that the Supreme Court absolutely should determine, and we need a clear answer for all the states. But do you think that this is something that they may be hesitant to address?
Well, I think that the cases that they've taken recently, the case on whether we should continue to have to be required to have majority-minority districts, it's Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. They're hearing that case. They're also hearing the case on birthright citizenship. So I think this case has a very good chance of also making it to the court.
Yeah, that's great. And I really hope that this is resolved sooner or more immediately. And so if this, and you mentioned this just briefly at the beginning, but if you are successful in this litigation, and then how would this actually affect apportionment in terms of both congressional seats and also the Electoral College overall?
So with each congressional seat comes one electoral vote. There, we estimate, are 11 congressional seats that would move from coastal states to states in the Midwest and South. So it really could change the balance of power in Congress and maybe even the outcome of a presidential election.
Wow, that is really incredible. And so how does that work then in terms of would this affect districting at all within the states if maybe they, like California, loses a couple of seats in Congress in the Electoral College? Would that affect how they would have to draw their district lines, or does it not matter in terms of how populous each of those districts are?
No, absolutely. They will have to redraw their district lines. The states that gain a seat or two will also have to redraw their district lines. And it's California, it's New York, it's the big states that you think of as sanctuary states that'll be the losers, and states like Missouri and Tennessee and Georgia that'll be winners in this.
Wow. And then last question for you, Attorney General Catherine Hanaway. I so appreciate your time. We've seen so often in these cases some of the procedural ways to kick out a case very early on, standing or, one or other of those types of things. Do you anticipate those types of challenges? And I don't want, you to get ahead, obviously, of your legal strategy, but in terms of the authority to challenge this, it seems pretty clear that you have that.
It does, but you're right. And so we've been joined in the suit by several individuals who are voters in Missouri who believe that their rights have been compromised, that they're not as vigorously and as well represented in the U.S. Congress as Californians are, because their vote has been diluted by us counting illegal immigrants in the census. And so I think they will help us overcome any standing challenges.
Amazing. Well, Godspeed to you on this. I hope that you are successful, because we deserve, as Americans, regardless of what state we live in, American citizens deserve correct apportionment. We deserve to have the Electoral College and the Congress apportioned fair and equitably. And this really should not be a partisan issue. But, people ask all the time, how can we affect, Washington? And we need to vote and we need to do all of those things. Well, yes, but the system itself needs to be fair to begin with. And if you are a state like California that's benefiting from counting illegal aliens, you're already tipping the scale before anyone even gets to the ballot box and before some of these measures even come up in Congress or before anybody even runs for president. So this is why lawsuits like this are incredibly important. We need to pray for a just and righteous outcome here. And Attorney General Catherine Hanaway, really appreciate it. I was telling their team, it's amazing how many great AGs have come from the state of Missouri. So, I think we gotta follow suit everywhere in all the other 50 states. All right. But as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna, at afr.net.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.